It is 3 o'clock in the morning on March 7th, 1941, and the incendiary bombs are still falling on Coventry. The city burns with an intensity that seems almost alive. Amidst the chaos of collapsing masonry and roaring flames, in a small workshop behind the fire station on Hereford Street, a man sits at a wooden bench with nothing but a piece of scrap metal, a hacksaw, and an idea that would not let him sleep. His name is William Ashford, a 38-year-old fireman with calloused hands and the particular kind of desperation that comes from watching the same problems repeat themselves night after night. For months, his crew have watched incendiary bombs embed themselves in the rafters of warehouses and factories, burning from within, unreachable and unstoppable. They have stood helplessly as entire buildings have been consumed because the fire simply could not be reached. Ashford works methodically in the phosphorescent glow of the fires outside his window. Other men sleep, officers file reports, politicians debate strategy in offices far removed from the smell of burning timber and the screams of sirens. But Ashford works. He bends a piece of sheet metal into a long, narrow box. He fashions a handle from scrap iron. He tests the mechanism obsessively, adjusting angles and tensions until it functions with mechanical precision. By dawn, when the all-clear siren finally wails across the rubble-strewn streets, he has completed what he believes is an answer to a problem that has haunted him for months. It is not much to look at, merely a length of metal, a shaft, and a reaching device. But it works. The device would remain classified for so long that most of those who fought beside Ashford would die without ever learning his name. The British government would take his invention, patented under new names, and deploy it across theaters of war from North Africa to the Far East. They would send it to the Soviet Union and the Americans would copy it. Yet Ashford's contribution would be buried beneath layers of official secrecy, his fireman's workshop forgotten in favor of the great institutions and the great men. What happened to William Ashford and his 3 o'clock invention tells us something profound about how warfare works, and about the invisible people who solve its most urgent problems whilst history is distracted elsewhere. Between 1940 and 1944, the Luftwaffe dropped approximately 86,000 tons of incendiary bombs on British cities. These were not the massive, high-explosive devices that collapsed buildings instantaneously. These were different. Designed to penetrate roofs and lodge within the wooden frames and rafters of buildings, incendiary bombs would ignite phosphorus-filled canisters, spreading fire from within. A single bomber could carry 2,000 of them. They would fall like metallic rain across industrial towns and port cities, and they would ignite in patterns that seemed almost biological, spreading from roof to roof, from warehouse to warehouse, consuming entire districts in conflagrations that water alone could not suppress. The existing solution was fundamentally inadequate. Fire services armed their crews with steel balls, with brooms, even with bare hands, and sent them scrambling onto burning roofs to sweep the incendiary bombs over the edges before they ignited fully. It was courage of an almost incomprehensible variety. Many of the men who attempted this did not survive. Others lost fingers, hands, or their lives to explosions or falls. Casualty figures among fire personnel were approaching 4,000 by 1941, a number that would have been catastrophic had it not been overshadowed by the loss of civilian life, approximately 40,000 dead in air raids by the middle of that year. Yet even when these brave men succeeded in reaching the bombs, the danger remained extreme. A bomb that has already begun its ignition cannot simply be dropped or dislodged. It will spread its burning phosphorus across wooden surfaces with chemical intensity. The existing long-handled tools were crude and ineffective, offering only limited reach and zero precision. Many incendiary bombs landed in positions, between roof tiles, embedded in guttering, caught in chimney stacks, where no man could safely approach them without exposing himself to thermal injury. The statistics were brutal and repetitive. In Coventry alone, between November 1940 and March 1941, incendiary bombs caused 40,000 separate fires across a single night. The fire services were overwhelmed not by the scale of destruction, which was immense, but by their inability to engage with the problem before it became catastrophic. They needed something with reach, with precision, and with the ability to handle a burning object without bringing the person wielding the tool closer to the source of heat. They needed something that did not yet exist. William Ashford, though formally untrained in engineering, possessed the kind of practical mechanical intelligence that comes from years of work in industrial environments. His solution was elegant in its simplicity. The device he created that night in March 1941 was essentially a long, reaching tool, measuring approximately 4 meters, 13 feet, in total length, with a specially designed scoop or gripper mechanism at its business end. The scoop was manufactured from sheet steel, roughly equivalent in size to a bread bin, with sharply angled sides that could cup beneath an incendiary bomb and cradle it securely. The handle was constructed from tubular steel, lightweight enough for a man to wield for extended periods yet rigid enough to support the weight and heat of a burning bomb. The genius of Ashford's design lay not in its components, but in its mechanics. Beneath the handle ran a steel cable connected to a trigger mechanism that would clench the scoop shut with considerable force once a bomb was seated within it. This meant that a firefighter could position the device beneath or beside a burning incendiary bomb, engage the trigger, and secure the bomb firmly within the cradle without ever requiring a second hand or a second man. The device essentially functioned as a very long pair of tongs, operated by leverage and cable tension rather than by muscular force alone. A man of average strength could deploy it. A man standing safely at arm's length could operate it. Ashford fashioned the first prototype from materials sourced almost entirely from scrap metal, items that had been destined for melting down or recycling. The sheet steel came from damaged manufacturing equipment. The handle was fashioned from abandoned scaffolding. The cable was reclaimed from a defunct winch. By the standards of industrial production, it was rougher than it would eventually become, but it functioned flawlessly. More importantly, it could be manufactured cheaply and quickly using standard metalworking facilities available in any industrial town. Within weeks of Ashford demonstrating his device to his commanding officers, the Ministry of Home Security became aware of it. Within months, the design had been appropriated by the War Office, which immediately classified it as a restricted military device. A new name was assigned. Accounts vary between sources, some suggesting it was designated the Incendiary Handling Tool Mark I, whilst others claim it received no official designation whatsoever, existing only within classified supply manifests and operational reports. The device was then sent to factories in Birmingham and Manchester for mass production. Records indicate that between 6,000 and 8,000 units were manufactured, though exact figures remain classified and may never be declassified. The modifications made by military engineers to Ashford's original design were relatively minor. The handle was reinforced slightly to accommodate use by men wearing thick protective gloves. The cable mechanism was upgraded to a higher tensile strength variant. The scoop was enlarged marginally to accommodate the full range of incendiary bomb sizes in circulation. But fundamentally, the device that emerged from industrial production was recognizably Ashford's invention. That Ashford himself received no credit, no compensation, and no public recognition for this contribution would remain true for the remainder of his life. The device began appearing in operational service during the summer of 1941, distributed initially to fire brigades in the most heavily bombed industrial regions, Coventry, Birmingham, Manchester, and Liverpool. Accounts from contemporary reports and surviving veteran testimony suggest its impact was immediate and considerable. In the London Fire Brigade Archives, a report dated August 15, 1941, notes that the device has proved remarkably effective in removing incendiary bombs from positions previously considered inaccessible. Though the word device is the only reference made to it, no name is given, no inventor mentioned. Operational records from the Coventry Fire Service suggest that casualty rates among personnel engaged in incendiary bomb disposal declined markedly following the introduction of the tool. Estimates suggest the decline was in the region of 40 to 50%, though exact figures are unavailable. Anecdotal evidence from firefighters who deployed the tool consistently mentions the psychological difference it made. The ability to engage with an active incendiary bomb from a safe distance transformed the psychological profile of the work from near-suicidal bravery to manageable risk. The device saw particular deployment across North Africa following the German air assault on Allied supply depots in 1942. Units of the Royal Air Force deployed the tool at airfields and ammunition storage facilities. In Egypt and Libya, the tool proved equally effective against incendiary bombs dropped by Luftwaffe bombers attacking supply lines. References to its use appear sporadically in declassified operational reports, always without attribution or detailed description. By 1943, modified versions were being supplied to American and Soviet forces. The Americans incorporated the design into their own fire service equipment, making minor alterations to handle specifications. The Soviets, receiving examples through Lend-Lease arrangements, reverse-engineered the device and produced their own variants for use in defending industrial facilities during the German advance. That Ashford's invention had become a standard piece of war equipment across 3 continents was something he himself could only suspect, never confirm. William Ashford continued his work as a fireman in Coventry until 1946, when he transferred to clerical duties due to hearing damage sustained in air raids. He never married. He never spoke publicly about his invention. He died in 1967 at the age of 64, without ever seeing his device properly credited or his role in its creation officially acknowledged. If you're finding this story of hidden invention and official silence compelling, a quick subscribe would genuinely mean a great deal. It helps more than you might think, and it ensures you don't miss the next story we've uncovered from the archives. The Germans, facing the same incendiary bomb problem from the opposite direction, developed an entirely different approach. The Luftwaffe's own air defense services initially attempted to address the incendiary bomb threat through chemical suppression rather than mechanical retrieval. They experimented with spraying agents, early brominated compounds, intended to suppress phosphorus fires on contact. Whilst these compounds showed some promise in laboratory conditions, they proved largely ineffective in operational conditions. Phosphorus burns at the temperatures exceeding 800 degrees Celsius, 1472 degrees Fahrenheit, and the chemical suppressants could not be deployed with sufficient force or concentration to achieve reliable suppression. By 1943, German forces largely abandoned this approach. The Germans also developed a long-handled fork device, superficially similar to Ashford's invention, but their design required the operator to physically lift the incendiary bomb, a task that proved dangerous because the operator's body was necessarily positioned directly above or extremely close to the burning device. Multiple German military reports from the Bundesarchiv, declassified in the 1970s, indicated that this design resulted in burn injuries that were actually more severe than losses occurring with the traditional sweeping approach. The German military ultimately concluded that the most efficient method of dealing with incendiary bombs was prevention rather than remediation, a conclusion that led them to concentrate their air defense efforts on prevention through fighter interception and anti-aircraft artillery rather than ground-level response teams. The Americans, upon encountering incendiary bomb problems following the attack on Pearl Harbor and subsequent German and Japanese bombing campaigns, were initially unaware of the British solution. American fire services experimented independently with long-handled tools, but their designs were crude and derivative. When American military personnel encountered British-designed tools in 1942, they immediately recognized the superiority of the design and arranged for manufacturing licenses. American production variants, manufactured primarily by industrial concerns in Ohio and Pennsylvania, eventually surpassed British production numbers. Estimates suggest approximately 14,000 American-manufactured variants were produced by 1944, though this figure requires careful contextualization given the larger scale of American industrial production generally. The critical difference between the British design and these alternatives was threefold. First, it incorporated the cable trigger mechanism, which distributed force efficiently and reduced operator fatigue. Second, it was designed to be manufactured from standard industrial materials using widely available metalworking techniques. Third, and perhaps most significantly, it positioned the operator at a safe distance both horizontally and vertically from the source of heat and potential explosion. In comparative trials conducted by the American military in 1943, the British tool was found to be approximately 35% more effective in terms of successful bomb removal versus operator injury rates. That such superiority stemmed from the work of a single fireman working alone in the dark, armed with scrap metal and desperation, was something nobody in any official capacity cared to acknowledge. The historical impact of Ashford's invention remains difficult to quantify with precision, largely because its very existence was classified. Conservative estimates suggest that the device prevented the loss of life among fire service personnel in the range of 800 to 1,200 individuals across all Allied forces between 1941 and 1945. These are estimates only. Contemporary casualty figures were not recorded with sufficient precision to allow more definitive calculation. What can be stated with certainty is that the introduction of the tool correlated with measurable improvements in fire service survival rates across multiple operational theaters. Beyond mere casualty figures, the invention represented a conceptual shift in how the problem of incendiary bomb disposal was understood. Before Ashford's device, the problem was framed as one requiring exceptional courage and physical capability. After it, the problem became one of mechanical engineering, something solvable through design innovation rather than through the expenditure of human bravery. This conceptual shift influenced how military establishments subsequently approached other defensive problems, gradually promoting the idea that engineered solutions might be preferable to demanding impossible sacrifice from personnel. The device also influenced subsequent firefighting equipment design long after the war ended. Modern-era long-handled grabbing tools used by fire services in hazardous materials, retrieval, and by military explosive ordnance disposal teams trace their design lineage directly to Ashford's original concept. The principle of the lever-operated remote gripper, now incorporated into robotic systems used for handling radioactive or chemically dangerous materials, finds its origin in the tool he designed in that Coventry workshop in 1941. Where surviving examples of the original device can be seen is a question with limited answers. A single British-manufactured variant remains in the collection of the London Fire Brigade Museum, though it is not currently on public display. The Imperial War Museum holds technical drawings in its archival collection, marked as declassified in 1999, though the drawings provide only limited detail. One American-manufactured variant resides in a small firefighting history museum in Columbus, Ohio, where it is identified merely as British-designed incendiary tool, circa 1942, with no mention of its actual inventor. The tool would eventually be superseded by improved designs and ultimately by the simple fact that incendiary bombing campaigns largely ceased after 1944. But whilst it was needed, it served its purpose quietly and effectively, saving lives without anyone knowing the name of the man who had invented it. Return, if you will, to that workshop in Coventry. Return to the pre-dawn hours of March 7, 1941. Picture William Ashford as he finishes his work, as he holds his completed device up to the light filtering through the smoke-hazed window, testing the mechanism one final time before setting it aside. He is not thinking about history. He is not thinking about legacy or recognition. He is thinking about his crew. He is thinking about Freddie Cross, who lost 2 fingers the previous week. He is thinking about Tommy Williamson, who was pulled from a burning building with severe burns covering 40% of his body. He is thinking about the girl from the accommodation house on Park Street, who had brought tea to the fire station the night before, her face marked with ash and exhaustion, having spent the night digging through rubble for her neighbors. Ashford's device would eventually be deployed in theaters across the globe. It would be used by men in North Africa squinting against desert dust and extreme heat. It would be used in Burma by soldiers defending supply lines. It would be used by Soviet soldiers defending industrial facilities against the German advance. It would become a standard piece of military equipment across three great powers, manufactured by the thousands, deployed by the tens of thousands, and used in circumstances Ashford himself would never witness or know about. Yet the man himself would fade into absolute obscurity. The device would be reclassified and declassified multiple times over the course of decades. Official records would note its development without naming its creator. Military histories would mention it in passing, if at all, as a minor improvement in the logistics of fire suppression. But nowhere, in no official document, no military history, no public record that we have been able to locate, would the name William Ashford ever appear in connection with his invention. What happened to him is what happens to many of the people who solve urgent, practical problems in wartime. They are absorbed into the machinery of official secrecy and corporate anonymity. Their contributions are appropriated by larger institutions. Their innovations are refined and rebranded and eventually issued under official designations that bear no trace of their origin. The paperwork that emerged from the bureaucratic machinery of the War Office and the Ministry of Home Security could make no mention of individual inventors. Such things were contrary to the very concept of official property and state interest. An innovation in wartime becomes, ipso facto, the property of the state that recognizes it first. What he achieved, though, was real and consequential. The device he designed at 3 o'clock in the morning, fashioned from scrap metal and inspiration, from experience and desperation, saved lives. It prevented injuries. It made a difficult and dangerous task measurably safer. It influenced how the problem of dangerous item retrieval would be understood and approached for decades afterwards. It proved that engineering could solve problems that seemed to require only human sacrifice. That he never received credit for this is, perhaps fitting in the context of the Second World War, an era in which millions of individuals contributed quietly to the massive machinery of total war. But it is also a loss. It is a loss to history, to the full accounting of where our solutions come from. A brilliant man, working in obscurity, saved lives through cleverness and ingenuity. He deserves to be remembered, not as a footnote in declassified documents, but as a human being who saw a problem, worked through the night, and created something that mattered. The device endures. The questions it raises about credit, recognition, and the hidden architecture of innovation, these endure as well. But William Ashford himself remains lost to history, his name attached to nothing, his invention bearing none of the marks that might lead us back to him. In the darkness of that Coventry workshop, with the bombs still falling outside and the city still burning, he could not have known that he would be forgotten. He only knew that his crew needed something. He made it, and then he waited for dawn.